When you realize this, it sets off a redundancy alarm system within the human form, within the human condition, because you begin to see things in such a simplistic way that you shake your head. And this really defines whether or not a being is of any use to the computational system, and how it's leading to exactly what I'm talking about, which is an inevitable purge. Um, so when you diet, when you exhaust, when you exercise, when you can confine yourself to only certain foods, when you get a divorce, when you get any form of separation, when you go on a vacation, um, when you switch jobs, all of this amounts to one thing, and that is to purge information willfully, readily. And once you purge that information, you have to automatically be in line with a supercompensation mechanism that you're anchoring to, right? So the longer that you take in this interim stage, which is, one could say, where free will doesn't take place in the purge. It's something where a super saturation is reached, or a maturation, or an upper limit, and you get to this place where you say, "There's just no further we can go," right? So you wonder how these oligarch or uh, hegemony, uh, these elites can do it, because they understand this, and they laugh at it. They think people are stupid, but it's really about the inability to be able to deal with such a nuance, such a to see the entire cosmos as a niche um, sort of gesture, right? And then to go, wow, this couldn't be what this is all about. So when you're talking about condensing information, if you allow yourself to be a node, or really a hub of information, you're going to be a teacher. You're going to be, you will decide, or you will be given the keys to be able to decide, but you will have the knowledge to know that if you give too much too soon, right, that you are essentially bleeding off your own node value, and that you're essentially handing the keys over to someone else. So you're only allowed to give people just enough, but in an egalitarian equality, right? Um, which leads to pacifism. In a society like this, which I don't know if it could exist or not, because what's happening is you have this quantum system that is utilizing thermodynamics, and it wants amalgamation. It wants to go back to final synthesis, where you have 100,000 people that are expressing the same information as one enlightenment genius, right? Like when you look at a society coming into its own and understanding plumbing, understanding architecture, and then being able to go into a sort of sedentary renaissance and say, now there's a recognition of geometrical structure and how that can take place when you look at archaeology or anthropology, right? So then you see this constant interpolation, this play, right, of amalgamation, amalgamated energies, right? And you get into these philosophical concepts of like Noumenon, or Qualia, Where is the value placed? Is it outside of you? Is it when you're observing someone else going through their qualia, their self-valuation, their Welt or their wealth, their world, Weltanschauung, their worldview, right? In Cogito, right? So you were born and therefore you are. That's the basic premise that we go off of. You feel angry or, sorry for, or which isn't a natural response. That's guilt and shame, but you understand. And it's a big difference between guilt and shame, as you'll see many people discussing in a very matter of fact way today, is that there's a very big difference. But the computational system wants to set up a series of two things that lead to ultimate hiatus and stasis, right? So that it can hang the algorithm of time between these states. And this is really what measures time, is this entropy and this. So you have in a thermodynamic unit, in a structural thermodynamic unit, the same enthalpy or the same amount of energy. Now that energy has to be dispersed, right? It has to be in movement. Otherwise, the hibernating computational system will reach stasis or equilibrium and no longer desire or have the need to function, right? So our essential task is to accept, purge. Purge could also be considered death, right? Because the depletion of one system leads into the supercompensation of another, right? So it's the energy is the only thing that it's ever thinking about. It does not localize, it has to localize you as an event, because the more you believe this, right, the more you are convinced, right, the more it can come to this final precipice with you, and it will regardless, even if you think you're inert and you do nothing. But I digress. You are going to invariably purge information. You'll have to leave one area, take your mind off of it, and you will have to supercompensate energies in the form of zeros and ones, in the form of entropy, in the form of communication that comes down to a principle-based system of meaning. So as long as you think there's meaning and time is going by through this chronobiological mechanism, right, which you get into the Geist, right, or the Zeitgebers, right? You get into this ghost of the past, but then you get into the Zeitgebers as the keepers of time, because, or you could look at it in esoteric arcana and look at it and go, oh, this is Clotho, which is one of the three witches spinning time, right? So the women give birth, we eat their little babies. Even the mamas are eating the little babies. They're not internalizing, they're not thinking. In fact, they're supposed to think that they have ultimate temporal carnal power over anything that's born out of their vagina, right? As to think that this isn't a separate issue, right? The biological isn't a separate issue from the mechanics, you could say, that are taking place. Really, the engineering mechanics that are playing out with the psychology. So you get into this Jungian. Like, I really believe that Jung was very interesting. That, yeah, you could say genius. Or was he just stuck in the psychology of the head, the mentalism, in the illusion that doesn't really even exist? That really what I'm discussing comes down to such simplistic mechanisms of power and control. It's going to maintain its power and its control, but it is an aberrant system that has an upper limit, and it can only process so much information. So what we end up doing is we're volleying or rallying this information like a tennis match, right? To get people, look over there, look over there, look over there. But all the while, when you see this volley, it's the same energy just going back and forth. But when somebody exhibits more energy, right, then you see what happens is there's a purge. It's the end of the volley. The ball got past somebody, or they expended too much energy in a given task, right? And that's what's happening here. It's this. So if you want to be a good sport, if you want to be somebody who's a good game, right, a good guy, from a Masonic tradition, you're going to play the sport and keep the ruse going, because ultimately by uncovering this, that everything just comes down to so it's kind of this parlay relay delay, right? There are three modes to the system, but there are these interim aspects to the system that you could say that there's five. You could say there's 5 points to the pentagram, right? So you have these 3 points and these 2 main points, right? So you have depletion, total depletion, and the more you completely and totally deplete, the more devout you are, right? The more will you have, the more respect you're going to have in your purge, and the more that you take on and amass, you're thought of as a greedy or selfish person. You're thought of as a self-indulgent, right? When the two processes need to be at least equal to one another. So you're automatically shamed into not doing that, okay? But then you have this interpolation mechanism going here where you have these other 3 variants that are thrown in, where you have something that could be looked at as flirting with stasis, or the potential for equilibrium. And so it makes these 3 aspects, that is between purge and supercompensation, but more so the stage just before purge and the stage just after supercompensation, where you have these 3 points, and it's where it's localization, right? I went through this a little bit in another paper that I was writing, but the geographical location is something that is just created by the construct, right? But it really is, when you get down to the file bit information of how to access this, that's what the internet shows, is that you don't have to travel to Europe to study the discourse of certain things. In fact, you could probably study theology off your phone if the information, the PDFs were accessible. You'd be able to study all day without having to take planes and go through all the weird rites and rituals that are involved there in the human condition, and to change your energy up and all the things that but was the event, the download, the thing that you were after all along, right? So we come into information and how to disintegrate and compartmentalize information.